Že pred skoraj 10 leti, to je bilo leto 2018, je v slovenski kulturni prostor vstopil Édouard Louis. To je bilo, ko je v mini teatru Ivica Buljan režiral njegovo zgodovino nasilja. Dogodek predstavlja eno od prelomnic, po kateri so našo kulturno sceno prevetrile teme razreda, diskriminacije in nasilja. Louisjeva odlika je predvsem intersekcionalnost in strukturno mišljenje teh problemov. Med drugim je preboj Louisa in njegovih predhodnic, kot sta Annie Ernaux in Didier Ribon, zakrivil tudi knjigo Zakaj ne pišem Diane Matkovič, ki Louisa eksplicitno navaja kot enega svojih najpomembnejših vzorov.
Ja, danes je v slovenščino prevedena že večina del tega mladega avtorja, kar je še kar redko za slovenski prostor, da smo tako ažurni in tako dosledni s prevajanjem. Smo pa o Édouardu Louisu govorili tudi že na radio. Že leta 2019 je za radio pripravila oddajo sodelavka Ana Lorger, ki je govorila o fenomenu Édouard, ki je takrat ravno vstopal na literarni prostor. 5 let kasneje, torej lani, pa sem naredila tudi jaz Subjekt meseca, Upodobiti se metode, ki je referenca na eno od njegovih nedavno prevedenih knjig Spremeniti se metode.
Danes imava pa z Lauro prav posebno čast. Tukaj sva na scenografiji študentske produkcije Opraviti z Edijem in po skoraj desetletju spremljanja, občudovanja nadaljavo se je Édouard Louis udejanjil tukaj v Sloveniji, v Ljubljani, kar je pospremil prevod dela Pogovarji o umetnosti in politiki s Kenom Loachom. Izšel je v slovenščini v prevodu Primoža Viteza pri založbi CF. Louis bo imel danes kasneje še predavanje na AGRFT-ju, potem jutri si bo ogledal to produkcijo in v četrtek pa bo imel pogovor v kinoteki po ogledu filma Édouard Louis ali Preobrazba. Danes se bova pa z njim pogovarjali Nastja in Laura.
Pogovor bo potekal v angleščini, tako da kar prešaltajmo. Hello, Édouard. How are you feeling today?
I'm fine. Thank you. Thank you so much for welcoming me here.
Thank you for coming here. Yeah, it's a pleasure.
Thank you for taking your time. You must see we're pretty excited, quite giddy. But today we're here to talk about the political potential of your work, as well as how your work is perceived and received, and the political potential of art in general.
Okay.
So our first question would be, we are here on the set of the play based on several of your works. You'll be seeing it tomorrow, and with it an interpretation of your life, actually. So you've experienced this quite a lot of times by now, I imagine, but how does it feel to let your work and with it your life gain a life of its own, so to speak?
You know, I love it. It's a very beautiful feeling of dispossession, because when I go to see in a theater an adaptation of the stories I wrote, I suddenly have the impression that those stories don't belong to me anymore. And in fact, the more people betray me, the happier I am, because it means that it's not my own anymore, but it belongs to them. And you know, lately in the last couple of years, there were a lot of conversation around the question of what can we talk about? Can we talk about other people's stories? Can we talk about other kinds of experiences, bodies? If you're a man, can you talk about women? If you are straight, can you talk about queer people? If you are white, can you talk about black people? And some of those questions, of course, were interesting, and they were raising some issues that we didn't raise before. But maybe this kind of space of questions made us forget how it is important sometimes to precisely not belong to our lives anymore. You know, to not carry our lives, to not carry our experience, to not carry our bodies, and to have someone else doing it for us. It's a kind of positive appropriation. And you know, it's something that many women who experienced rape or sexual violence talk about. They talk about the fact that after the sexual assault, they didn't want to talk about it again and again. You know, the police was telling them, tell the story again. The judges tell you, tell the story again. The lawyers tell you, tell the stories again. The doctors tell you, tell the stories again. And they don't believe you in general. And then you suddenly have to carry a pain that you did not choose. Not only a violence was imposed on your body, but secondly, another violence is imposed on your mouth, where you have to drag this story with you again and again and again. And if people talk, of course, I'm happy. But I also believe in the fundamental right that we have not to talk about a pain that we did not choose. You are a woman, you don't choose to live in a world full of masculine domination. You are gay, you don't choose to live in an homophobic world. And then society cannot expect you to carry that suffering that society imposed on you. It's a double violence. And so the space of theater for me is a kind of space that resolved that question, where suddenly our stories belong to someone else. I did not choose my father, I did not choose my mother, I did not choose my body, I did not choose my past, and then it belongs to the actor, and it's a relief. So yeah, I really love it. I don't feel I'm attending my story when I go see something on stage, but it's their problem, not mine.
Amazing. Yeah, you wrote about this in the letter, your identity is not private property. Because I feel like, I think it's a fact that this modern rhetoric, so this very actually neoliberal rhetoric, but that also exists on the left, is that, yeah, precisely like, no, this is my story, like I'm the only one who owns it.
It belongs to me, I own it. I have a car, I have a house, I have an identity, I have a purse. My purse is expensive. My history is personal and rich, and no one can take it. And it's really a problem for me when the left starts talking the language of property, because I am in favor of the destruction of property. I don't believe in property. So I would prefer that the lands belongs to everyone. I would prefer that the stories belong to everyone. I would prefer so there was this strange movement in which suddenly a right-wing rhetoric became a tool from the left. And for me, it's something we have to question and challenge. And of course, it's a legitimate question to ask what happens when for so many centuries men were talking about women in a distant way, in a caricatural way, and women rarely have an opportunity to talk about themselves, you know? It's an important question. And it's a question I'm addressing also. For me, as a gay person, of course, the story of the representation of homosexuality was also full of caricature of people who didn't have any connection to it. But then it's a completely different question than the one asking who can talk, you know? The question is, what are people saying? And I met a lot of homophobic gay people in my life. I met a lot of women who were anti-women, you know. Marine Le Pen in France, she's the head of the far right, and she's very misogynistic, and she's a woman. So I prefer a left-wing man like Jean-Paul Sartre to talk about women than someone like Marine Le Pen. So yes, all those questions are complex, but I think the way they are being asked today is suffering from a lack of depth in the philosophical question and political questions.
Yeah, in your work you write about many different stories. Of course, the story of yourself, the story of your mother and your father. For example, in Killing My Father, Who Killed My Father, and A Woman's Battles and Transformations. And I think that there is a very strong influence of Annie Ernaux that you also mention. And the two of her works, A Woman's Story and A Man's Place, have been recently translated to Slovene. And I've noticed one difference, that she wrote about her parents after their death. However, you write about them while they're still alive in a very intimate way. And how do you perceive the importance of such writing, the revelation of a very intimate part of a person that is at the same time, of course, political? How do you perceive that?
Yes, Annie Ernaux made statements about it. She said openly that she wanted to wait the death of her parents before writing about them. And I didn't have the same ethical problem inside me, because the difference between Annie Ernaux and me in the relationships we have with our families is that Annie Ernaux stayed close to her family during her whole life. And I was not close from my family already when I was 5 or 6 years old. My books don't tell a story of a kid who escaped. I'm not a kid who escaped my family. I was a kid who was pushed away from his family. It's not a story of an escape. It's a story of someone who doesn't have a choice but to live. My family, my parents were telling me that I was not masculine enough, that I was strange, that I walked like a girl, that I was talking like a girl, and therefore that it was a problem. And because of that, when I started writing, I didn't have a problem with writing with my family of hurting them, because I had the sense that I didn't belong to that family. Not because I chose, but because it told me that I did not belong. So probably it gave me more freedom in a way than Annie Ernaux. More pain, but more freedom. More pain as a child to be completely, chased away from the family. And of course, as a child, my dream was to fit in. My dream was not to be different. And that's the story I tell in my books, and particularly in my first book, The End of Eddie. The kid I was tried everything to be normal, what other people call normal, which was masculine, So the story of my childhood was an endless fight to be conform, to be exactly the way other people wanted me to be. I wasn't dreaming of being different. Later on it came, but first, when I was talking, my father was ashamed, and I wanted him not to be ashamed anymore. I didn't dream of being Simone de Beauvoir or Toni Morrison. I dreamed of being good at soccer, so my father wouldn't be ashamed like any kid. But it didn't work. And because of that, I don't know, it allowed me to write about those realities in a very direct way, because I didn't care hurting my mother or my father, because they hurt me. And the story of our relationship was a story of wounds that we were inflicting to each other. So for me, it was not strange to inflict a wound. It was, my parents made me understand that inflicting wounds was normal. And later on, I tried to fix that. But in the beginning, when I started writing, I didn't think about that. So, yeah, it was different.
I see.
Oh, that opens a lot of questions. But maybe I wanted to ask you first about, so you're talking about your experience, so about yourself, but you're not actually talking about yourself. You're talking about wider structural problems, about systemic violence, oppression. So, but yeah, from this personal perspective, that some would argue that's quite neoliberal because of commodification of personal experiences and so on. But you also stated, and that's related to what you were just talking about, you stated that no, actually, you don't talk about a person, so an individual who made it in the world because he was special, but precisely because of this violence that was inflicted upon you. But how do you navigate? Because it is, I think, a tricky question. So when does the personal become like political? And when is it just, commodified pain, sort of?
I don't know. It seems always very spontaneous to me to write in a collective way. I don't identify as a person. I don't see myself as a person, strangely. I never think about myself as a person. I always see myself as a platform crossed by many things, many influences, many violences, many hopes, many dreams. But I don't see things as a property, precisely. Maybe I'm crazy, but this is the way I see life. And I never wake up thinking I am a person. I'm not interested in this. I mean, people can be wanting to be a person, and I'm fine, but this is not my dream, being a person. And as soon as I started writing about my past and my childhood, and my family and my father and my mother, I immediately saw it as part of a collective history, you know, that my tears when I was a kid and when people were calling me a faggot at school and spitting on my face because I was a faggot, I didn't see those tears as something personal. I saw those tears as something political, because they were being made possible by a history of masculine domination, of homophobia, of violence that was allowed that is allowed in certain circles of society, that is being performed towards women, towards gays, towards minorities in general. And how strange would it be to think that it's a personal thing? For me, that's really what is exotic. That's people who see themselves as the result of something very personal. And precisely in writing about my past, I always had the impression of dissolving myself. And that's another strange question, because people often ask me, it should be painful for you to write about, you know, your past and your family and your parents, but no, because it's the opposite. I dissolve myself in a story that is bigger than me. And I don't think about myself when I write, if there is something such as a self. And in a way, autobiography is the most collective and the least narcissistic genre of all the literary genre. Because when I write about my past, I write about a family I did not choose, a background I did not choose, a country I did not choose, a name I did not choose, a father I did not choose, a body I did not choose, a situation I did not choose. Unless a fiction writer, they choose the name of the main characters, they choose the situations, they choose the story they tell, and it's fine. I love fiction. But what I just mean to say is that when I write, is the opposite of a self, which is writing. It's once again this kind of collective forces that are, you know, interfering with each other. And this is what I'm trying to say. And those forces can be, as you were saying, extremely paradoxical, because as you were mentioning, the reason why I escaped the fate that was awaiting me, the reason why that I escaped poverty, exclusion, misery, and that I'm here today talking to you and that you are listening to me, it's not because I was more sensitive or more clever or more free and that I was like predestined to escape. It's precisely because I was less free than the others, because I had a double domination, a class domination, poor, and a sexual domination, faggot. And those two ones clash with each other. And they didn't leave me a choice but to escape. And so I did not escape because I was more free. I escaped because I was less free, because my other brothers, they didn't have this supplementary social determinism of being called a faggot, and because of that, they stayed a prisoner of their milieu. And so, you know, same when I talk about my body escaping, I'm not talking about a person. I'm talking about social forces that meet each other within a body and don't leave that body a choice but to escape. But that's not how life works. You don't wake up thinking, okay, I will escape. And if you think so, it's just a consequence of something you don't understand. And if you do that, you create a very classist and violent narration of the world, because it means that if some people wake up thinking, I want to escape, then you indirectly accuse the other people of not fighting hard enough. But that's not how things work. You don't choose or not choose. You are crossed by things that you don't master, that you don't control.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You don't choose to escape, but at the same time, it's not easy to escape. Mm-hmm. So there must be something, I mean, you've got to be equipped. Mm-hmm. Also in your book, I mean, it's not a book, it's not your book, it's a transcription of your talk with Ken Loach that just came out here in Slovenian. You talk about You talk about how a lot of people that escape their country, escape war, escape violence. You talk about how they are usually middle class, because if you don't have the resources, it's very hard to escape. Yes. So what you had some help, so to say, and for example, also your mother had some help from you. No, this is just this is probably, you talk about escape a lot, and today you will be holding a lecture on it. No, but I guess I wanted to ask you about this escape, because it's not that easy to run away. Yeah, this is the
and clearly the question of willpower or the question of wanting is extremely complex. And I did not have choice but to escape, and therefore I wanted to escape because I had no choice. So of course the line between what we want and what is imposed on ourselves is extremely thin, and we never know, what in our lives, what in our desires is imposed on us. What do we choose? What do we really choose? Where the authenticity in our choices? I don't even think we can have an answer to that, because there is what Karl Marx called alienation in the last concept of alienation, because he changed the definition throughout his body of work. But in the last Marx, there is this idea of alienation that we think we want something, but it's capitalism and the society around us that impose on us the desires, the dreams, the hopes, the will that we have. And then how can you find in the middle of it what you really want and what you don't want? It's almost impossible. It's almost impossible, because they are so intertwined that you cannot go back to a neutral version of yourself that would exist before society, before life, before your family, before language. It doesn't exist. As soon as you start hoping, as soon as you start dreaming, as soon as you start wanting, you are already taken in a word. So you will never find back the truth of yourself or of your desire. And therefore, the truth of what you are should not be the result of a digging, because there is nothing to find, because it's so intertwined. But the truth of yourself should be what you are building, It's not digging, it's building. It's not what I am, but what can I be? And of course, this what can I be is full of everything that precedes you. Your history, your family, your language, your country, the history of your country. And at an individual level, it's what happened for me when I was a kid. I didn't have a choice but to escape, and therefore I really wanted to escape. And of course, this will to escape was not an authentic, profound, before my birth kind of desire. It was built by the world around me, but it made me want it so much. And I remember when I was 10, it's a story I tell in my book, Change, when I was 10 or 11, and those boys at school were spitting on me and calling me a faggot. I was thinking, one day I will escape and I will do things, and I will be important, and I will be rich, and like a kid would think, of course, the naive ideas of escaping. And it will be my revenge against violence. I will show them that they tell me every day that I am nothing, and I will tell them that I can actually be better than them. And it was an obsession. And it's very strange, because it's too big for a kid in 10 years old to be thinking this. You should be thinking of playing, of playing with your friends and playing, I don't know what, Pokemon or something. But you shouldn't have such big ideas. It's too much. It's exhausting for a kid. Yeah. But anyway, we're thinking about it all the time. And it's not because I was special. It was because I was in this situation. And then when you eventually escape, there is a moment where you have to think, okay, what do I want in this escape, Because first you are a victim of your escape very often. It's what I try to, yeah.
Yeah, and I think this way of perceiving escape and also your history is very bound to not psychology and digging only in yourself, but also understanding the surrounding, the relationship between people and this inside the society. It's very sociological, and it's also bound to, on one hand, theory. For example, Bourdieu, as you mentioned him very often, but on the other hand, it's also very political because you show the backgrounds of people, of yourself, and the influences on your life. And I think this is one of the political potentials of your work. You show the background, you show an explanation for it in a way, but also you show something that may not be presented in the mainstream literature so often. At least that was in the past. I know you mentioned Sartre, that was talking about the role of literature to make some stories visible, to present it. But in these days when we have social media and I think everything is very visible. One example that you also talk about is the genocide in Gaza. It is extremely visible. It's not that, but we are not confronted with it. So I think you suggest a different term for it, not the visibility, but confronting. So the aesthetics of confrontation. So could you maybe tell us a bit more about this part of your literature and this term, and how do you practice it?
Yes. You know, I was extremely influenced by Jean-Paul Sartre, and I think is maybe with Bertolt Brecht one of the last ones who gave us a very strong, powerful political theory of art. And I was reading it a lot when I was a student and still today. And Sartre had this idea that art and literature in particular have a role of information and for informing people. And it's true that if you look at the history of literature, and if you take the example of French literature, when Émile Zola was working about factory workers or coal miners, or when Victor Hugo was writing about extremely poor people, or when Jean-Paul Sartre and Simone de Beauvoir were talking about colonized people, women, there was this idea that we are showing to the world some things they don't know, you know. When Zola was writing, people in Paris had no clue of how it looked in the north of France. You know, there were no fast train, there was no plane, there was less newspapers, there were less information circulating. And people were reading Zola for the beauty of literature, but also as a role of information, you know. Even Balzac was read like this. You know, in Russia, people would read Balzac in order to know how society was in France, you know. And there was a big fascination in the aristocratic circles of Russia to Balzac, because he was describing French society and giving information that people didn't expect and didn't even imagine. And as you were saying, today in the 21st century, we have like information everywhere. There is internet, there are the social medias, there is so much more literature published now than it was before. You have information's website, you have artificial intelligence, and so the world is much more accessible in terms of knowledge. And even if we don't know everything, you can very quickly know something. Okay, how many people live in Ljubljana? You go, you ask ChatGPT or Google, and you know within a second. And all of that made me think that maybe, contrary to what Sartre was saying with his definition of committed literature, littérature engagée, that maybe the role of literature was not showing reality anymore. It was not giving information anymore, because this is what Sartre very simply defines committed literature when he says the writer shows something that you did not know before. For example, this glass, you don't necessarily see it. This sponge, you didn't necessarily see it before I mentioned it, because there's so many things here, you don't see everything. But it works the same way for political phenomena. If I show you the conditions of women, if I show you the conditions of working class people, I show you, then you see it and you have to deal with it. But what happened when, like today, we have so many information, then for me the question is not to show anymore, but to confront people to what they already know, but they don't want to know. And it's, you know, a kind of strange and surprising, because when I started publishing my books, so many people told me, oh, I didn't believe that poverty existed like this. And I don't believe those people. I think they are lying, you know, they are liars. Everyone knows that poverty exists. Everyone sees homeless people in the street, you know. I remember one day I was in Sweden to present my book, and the person asking me question told me, oh, French society and Swedish society is extremely different because we don't have social classes here. And so I asked this person, but who is cleaning the toilets of the station? Is it the academic teachers? Is it no, it's probably cleaning women. So I think it's social class. And those people know. When they go to the station and they see the toilets being cleaned, they see working class people. They see people of color most of the time who will do it. And they know that classes exist. So they just deny some things that they know.
They're not confronted, right, by the reality. They're not confronted. And how do you think I think this is the potential of literature that is, and also theater, which is maybe stronger than philosophy, sociology, because it kind of abstracts the ideas. So I also heard a guy saying, of course, patriarchy is not present in Slovenia because he had such an abstract middle-age idea of it. He could not grasp it. So I think this is a very important part. So my next question would be, how do you use the tools of literature, of style, of presenting a reality to really confront? Where do you see this potential, in which style, which manner?
Yeah, you know, it's a big question, and I think that a confrontational literature or confrontational art compared to committed art, to committed literature, should be a very formal work, because only a work on the form, on the style, on the writing, on the staging can create a confrontation with the information that you are giving. Mm-hmm. And so for me, when I write, the question is, how do I find a way of writing, a way of framing reality, a way of describing reality that makes people unable to escape what I'm going to say, you know, because people escape. And as you say, one of the greatest and scariest example of that recently was the genocide in Gaza, because there were images every day online, on Instagram, on the internet, live pictures of people dying, children dying. And suddenly you realize that information was not changing the way people would react to that, would not convince politicians to make it stop. And for me, it answered that strange questions that I had. You know, I think we all crossed that question when we are 14 or 15 years old and we are in high school studying Second World War, and we all think like, why didn't people stop that? Why didn't people stop what was happening? So many people knew and they didn't stop. Yeah. And when you are a kid, you don't have the answer. Yeah. And you're like, it's a big metaphysical mystery. And suddenly, with the genocide in Gaza, we see actually that people can live so easily with information, and they can learn a way to deny what they say. And therefore, the role of art, among every other things, of course, I don't believe only in art, but the role of art is to yes, really force people watching. And so when I write, I'm trying to find that, and I'm trying to do it with emotions, for example, because I think emotions are very difficult to escape. Yes. I'm trying to make very emotional books, which is also, you know, I talked a lot about it, but it's also a war at literature for me to put emotions so present in my book. Because when I started to write books, I realized that in the dominant class, in the bourgeoisie, which is mostly reading the books and producing the book, emotions had a very bad reputation, you know. Very often a reviewer will say that a good book is good because it's without pathos. You know, oh, it's very good because there is no pathos. And you're like, why? Why would pathos be a problem? Why would it be a literary problem? Why would it be an aesthetic problem? And even more deeply, all the aesthetic of the working class is being diminished by the bourgeoisie because it's full of emotions. The working class people, they watch telenovelas, you know, and stupid TV shows that makes you cry. They read novels that they buy at the station that makes you cry because they are cheesy love story. And so behind the definition of emotion, there is a class war lying under it, you know. Emotions are working class. They are accepted in the bourgeoisie only if they happen by accident. So very often you will have a reviewer saying about a book, oh, it's very beautiful because the emotion rise suddenly by accident, you know. That's what they say about Annie Ernaux all the time, you know. Her style is so cold and direct, and suddenly you have emotions by accident. Yes. as if what Annie Ernaux was doing and the value of her work was to diminish emotions. I think the value of her work is much more things than that, and other things, talking about working class people, talking about women, talking about abortion, reinventing literature. What she does is not hiding emotion, and that's not the value of her work. And so in ejecting emotion like I try to do in my book, and in my books in general, I had the impression of leading a class war against the dominant aesthetic and with the emotions to force people to watch some things that they don't want to see.
How do you see maybe this class war today in literature? Because maybe we see some things that are changing in the dominant literature, as if the margin, what used to be the margin, is slowly coming in the center of attention. For example, Annie Ernaux, that writes about such topics as you mentioned in a specific way, got a Nobel Prize in 2022. And also your works that are full of emotion, as you say, the political, explicitly political style, also gain recognition. You are translated. Do you think that the class war is already happening, or that something is changing on the field of literature? How do you perceive it today?
Yes, but you know, paradoxically, the most important literature and the most central literature was very often written by people from the margins, you know. And if you look at all the greatest writers in history, if you think at Jean Genet, Marcel Proust, Virginia Woolf, Flannery O'Connor, James Baldwin, Toni Morrison, all of them came from marginalized categories of society, not necessarily in terms of class, but at least in terms of gender, of race, of sexuality, of position in the social structure. And so it's, in fact, literature is always done by people who are excluded by something. Because they're excluded, they have something to say. The dominants, they have nothing to say. They are so blind, you know, because they live with their privileges. They don't need to question the world. And therefore, they don't do such good literature, except for a few exceptions. So the question is, in the history of literature, how every time in history, a new kind of margins comes in the center of literature, you know, a new kind of experiences, a new kind of domination that was not expressed before, a new kind of violence that was not pictured before, that was not described before. And this is the history of literature. And so we have to find every time what is missing now, in spite of all the revolutions that were being made against literature. Because already when Toni Morrison was writing, she was saying, I write about black people because the literary field doesn't do it. So she was writing against literature, you know. When André Gide was writing about homosexuality in a very direct way, it was against literature. He had so many polemics, he had so many violence against him. So, yes, but it's interesting because it says a lot about domination also. And in my books, you know, this is at a completely other level. This is the difference between my father and my mother. My mother escaped like me because she was more dominated than my father. And my father did not escape because he was more dominant. And because he was dominant, he didn't question the reality around him, you know, exactly like in literature. My father thought that he was drinking a lot because he was a real man. He thought that he didn't go to school because he was a real man and he didn't obey the teachers. He thought he was drinking and doing stupid things because it was a performance of his masculinity. Whereas my mother, as a woman, she never thought that she chose things. It was my father, it was society who was telling her, you stay home, you raise the kids, you cook, you clean the house, you go shopping, you don't drive, you don't have a work, you don't do this, you don't do that. I command, I choose what happened and not you. So one day my mother was able to do something like an escape and say, I'm going to take back what this society stole from me. But my father, in his dominant position, he didn't have this process of reclaiming something because he thought it shows. So his dominant status was a curse. And it's what very often happens in literature. People who have too much privileges, they do really bad literature. And I remember, I finished with this because it's a long answer, but I remember there was a very beautiful interview by Toni Morrison in France. She was interviewed by a man, and this man was white, and Toni Morrison told him, you know, if black people had been putting white people in slavery, you would be writing the books, and I would be asking the questions. But because you put my people in slavery, now I am the one who writes, and you are the one who asks me questions. And it's a very interesting, for me, issues that makes the issues of domination much more complex than what we would spontaneously think.
Thank you so much. I think that's all we have time for right now.
Thank you so
much.
Good luck on your lectures, and thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.